Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Vital Descent. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarlane, and this one is episode 265. Show notes are at vitaldescent.com/265. And for the first time on the show, I have Brad Pearce. Brad, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I really appreciate you joining me and sending this article my way that we're going to be discussing today. You did like an expose, real like deep dive into this organization, this Israeli organization that we're going to talk about here in a second. But first, I just wanted to ask you if you could introduce yourself to the audience and your Substack.
Okay, well, my name is Brad Pearce. I live in Eastern Washington, like south of Spokane. I write the Substack called The Wayward Rabbler, where I cover just various things that I find interesting, I guess, but I do a lot of different stories about foreign policy. My academic background is actually in literature, so I'm the most interested in the way narratives are formed and kind of how you separate truth from fiction, and in telling kind of the most interesting foreign policy stories of our era. And I'm particularly interested in the way that the kind of the systems that we inherited for the world order are collapsing, but kind of the boomer rulers of the world are not letting go of them, which, you know, something that we all experience every day. So I cover a lot of different topics. It ends up being most of all Africa and West Asia and Eastern Europe, so kind of that broader area. And I mostly talk about things like U.S. influence and soft power and kind of the new Cold War and things of that nature. And then I also write a fair amount about, you know, protests or interesting like populist politicians or various scandals and stuff of that nature.
And what is your intellectual background? Because I don't think that you and I have talked much about that just specifically.
So, I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm kind of just a guy. But I mean, I do have a 4-year degree in American literature. I only started writing regularly at the beginning of 2022 when I was somewhat recovering from how crazy society going crazy over COVID made me. Because, you know, I didn't really believe in what was going on from the get-go. So the cognitive dissonance and everything else really had a deleterious effect on me. So, I mean, that's mostly my background. I've been involved in, you know, libertarian anti-war type stuff pretty heavily since the Ron Paul 2008 campaign, though, since like the very beginning of it. So I've been around a long time. I just wasn't myself someone that was contributing all that much, I guess.
Yeah, well, when I was reading your article, I found, you know, you and I to be very similar in terms of the way that we look at things, and even like our educational backgrounds too. We were talking about both being like English literature majors, at least in undergrad. But right away in your piece, you were talking about the 40 beheaded babies story, and that, you know, kind of getting into just creating suspicion at least, and wanting to verify that and see where it comes from, and doing a look into it. But I guess we should properly start out with what is this article? How did you get clued onto it? What made you decide to write about this?
So the article is titled, if you say anything to anyone, a Zaka van will run you over: the sordid history of the Zaka Rescue Organization. And what happened is that when I was just looking at general things about, what you would generally call atrocity propaganda, though, I mean, obviously it's the case that Hamas massacred a lot of civilians in Israel. So, I mean, we can be sure that at least some of the horrific things we're hearing are in fact true, but you still have to be skeptical of all of it, especially being as the atrocities are being used to justify further atrocities and, you know, make people think emotionally instead of rationally and continue a cycle of violence. So I was reading this article in the Daily Mail from this woman that she doesn't bear going into, but I think she's kind of sketchy as well. And I saw this interview with this guy named Yossi Landau, which Yossi is the Hebrew version of the name Joshua. And he was just telling some pretty horrific stories that I found very difficult to believe. One was that they found a kid that was cut out of the mother's stomach, like a fetus that was cut out of the mother's stomach and had like a knife stabbed in it. And another was that they had like tortured these two children tied together on a table while their parents were tied to chairs. And I found both of those difficult to believe, though they could possibly be true. I mean, obviously there were shocking levels of violence, and men that are consumed by hatred and bloodlust will do truly horrific things. That's been the case for absolutely all of human history. But I just got curious about who it was. So I did the most basic research that I do about NGOs, which was basically just to see who funded them, because often it is as simple as seeing, oh, National Endowment for Democracy or, Open Societies Foundations or something like that. And, you find it really easily. And there was just absolutely no information, publicly accessible on their website. So I just started digging. And I both found that the U.S. fundraising organizations are really shady. And then also it's a really scandal-plagued organization. There's been an extraordinary amount of coverage about it in the Israeli press dating back 10 years, but especially from 2021 to 2022.
And I thought it was interesting that my mind went where your mind went, because I think like halfway through the article, you mentioned something about the white helmets in Syria.
Yeah.
And so this organization that you uncovered as, being the originator of some of these claims is essentially, I mean, is there something about it that like, I don't know, like a PR propaganda operation being under the cover ostensibly of like a rescue organization of like disaster relief or war relief?
Well, it turns out the situations between the two are really not the same at all. Though I spoke to two people besides you that, are kind of in the same intellectual circles as us, and both immediately like, oh, like the white helmets, or, that's what it made them think of as well. I do think it's just a unique opportunity to provide propaganda. We've all heard the like Mr. Rogers quote of like, in a disaster, look for the helpers. So, you see anyone that does work like this, they immediately seem very credible, and it's an easy way to get someone to, tell you about atrocities in a war zone, or, spread the stories of a disaster. So I think it just is the nature of it, but I didn't actually find any evidence that Zaka was intentionally being used for propaganda purposes by anyone. I more found a whole lot of evidence that they're not credible people in general about any topic.
And I think so. Thanks. It's good to point out that that's kind of where the similarities maybe end at the outward appearance. But then one thing that you identified too is this perverse incentive where when your business is dealing with disaster or I don't know exactly what to call it, warfare, recovery, rescue efforts, maybe your incentive then is to create more things to respond to and have the PR, at least the outward appearance that, well, we're in crisis. So the more crisis that happens, the more funding we get.
So, a really good parallel to this is the homelessness initiatives in like New York and San Francisco and Seattle are extremely corrupt, and they're ran by random NGOs that, are charging like $70,000 for a tent. And there's this entire poverty industry in the United States that just absolutely makes enormous fortunes perpetuating poverty, or, like Black Lives Matter wants to stoke racial violence, basically. So it's really a problem all over. And I mean, when you're a cynic like I am, you do see stuff like this throughout society because, everyone ends up being self-interested once they're established. It just is a general problem. So, I mean, yeah, it is an incentive, though. And, it had been identified in the Israeli media in that 2016 article that I included about the ego wars among the rescue organizations is, they want to get there first. And then basically they're competing over who gets to rescue the people, who talks to media, who has the most extreme story that makes people want to donate. And that is just a general problem with any human organization. If you don't mind, there's just a really funny story from antiquity about this. Is that, there's these letters from Pliny the Younger between him and the Emperor Trajan. And there's one where he asks for permission to start a fire brigade in the city where he's the governor. And Trajan responds that if you let them become an organization, they'll just become a political faction and only cause problems. So instead, businesses should put out their own fires. And so basically just anything, no matter how good it seems, like, start a fire department, you do end up with entrenched interests that then cause any number of problems within society.
Isn't that, it's from that movie Gangs of New York, where I don't know if you've seen that, but there's a riot and a fire breaks out, and then two different fire departments come and they start fist fighting over who's going to put the fire out. I don't know if
I actually haven't seen that, but I do think that is probably from that movie.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like something that would be from that movie. I saw, I don't know if it was Bird Arcus from Friends Against, or a Timeline Earth podcast, who was tweeting about Gangs of New York just recently, and I haven't even thought about that film in years. So maybe that's where that parallel comes from in my head when it comes to mind. But so you had mentioned too, so I guess to kind of get on, to get further with this story develops. So when you focused on this particular individual, which I'm terrible at pronouncing names when I'm not familiar with them, but he seems to be the one behind at least one of the Zaka Search and Rescue organizations.
Okay, so firstly, if you can throw up a picture on the screen for the viewers, this guy looks exactly like an Orthodox Hide the Pain Herald, like the meme. He looks just like Hide the Pain Herald, the sad guy.
Yeah.
It's really, yeah. Anyway, so this guy, I guess I don't even know if I heard it pronounced, but Yehuda Meshi-Zahav is how I've been saying it in my head.
Yeah.
And I had the worst time consistently spelling this right while writing this article. But anyway, so he's the founder of the main original Zaka. There being a proliferation of these organizations is a big part of the ultimate story. But he had been part of one of these Haredi sects. I don't remember the name right now. That means ultra orthodox. They don't really like that translation into English, but that's what they're commonly called in English. These ultra orthodox Jews that were anti-Zionist. He's an 11th generation Jerusalemite, which means his family got there in like the mid 18th century. And so he had been their kind of their strong guy on the streets. They called him like their operational commander or something. And, he got arrested for protesting against the state of Israel a lot in his youth. And then the story that they tell is that after he helped respond to a terrorist attack in 1989, it kind of changed his views. And then they also got the idea for doing these rescue services, which are basically, the idea is that Haredi Jews show up on what they call motorcycles. They're actually like three-wheelers. And then they respond to terrorist attacks and other accidents. And then they help identify the body parts so they can be buried in compliance with Jewish custom, which means that all of the body parts and the blood are supposed to be collected and buried together within 24 hours, ideally. So that's where they came from. And then over time, he became a very strong supporter of the state of Israel. And he was uniquely important to them because Israel's a very divided society, and he gave them outreach to these ultra-Orthodox communities that they've had trouble integrating into their society. And he kind of became the middleman between them.
So like in terms of when you say like an ultra-divided society, I admittedly am not like, I've had to give myself a crash course on this issue over the last, 10 or 14 days. What is the division? Is it between like the more Orthodox Jews and the rest of society?
So I mean, there's multiple divisions within them, but so taking apart the fact that Israel's 20% Arab Israeli, and then all of the issues with the Palestinians, and for any viewers, Arab Israeli is what you call Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. So taking apart those divides, Israel has, a somewhat similar divide to us in that there's a very secular, liberal, urbane part of society that are highly educated. They, have one or two kids later in life. They really like the institutions. And I wrote about this back in March. And then there's a more like populist, poorer, religious part of society. And these ultra-Orthodox groups form the most extreme wing of that. They live in their own neighborhoods that have modesty patrols to make you dress like, like you'd imagine a Jew in like the Fiddler on the Roof dressing or something like that. And so they're like one group. But so the big issue of what's been dividing Israeli society in 2023 up until these attacks happened is that Israel never agreed on a formal constitution. So they're governed by these basic laws, and they have this unicameral legislature. And then they have this court that's completely detached from it, that the legislature has basically no control over. Like they don't really even choose the justices and everything like that. And so they were Netanyahu was trying to weaken the court because it's the bastion of well-educated secularism in the country. And he was basically trying to make it sort of a sheer majoritarian, mob rule sort of government where there was no checks on the power of the unicameral legislature. And people were really worried about the impact that would have on minority rights and other things of that nature, which are very reasonable concerns. So they had, protests, huge protests the entire year from people that didn't want the judicial reform. And the fact is, from an outsider's perspective, they needed to make modest reforms to the judiciary so that it had some responsiveness to the rest of the government and to, the electorate. But the reforms Netanyahu wanted to make took it much, much too far and did really present the problems that the protesters said they did. But neither side particularly wanted to budge on the issue.
Okay, yeah, and I think that context is really important too, to kind of, because I think like people, and I'm guilty of this myself, like people think that Israel is a monolith, that there's uniform opinion on things, and that there isn't any disagreement, that it just moves forward as one agreeing entity. And likewise, with Palestinians, or but no one thinks about that per se when it comes to like internal US politics.
Yeah, so to relate it to America, the ultra-Orthodox would be like the Amish or something like that, except they're like 10% of society, so a lot more of them, and they traditionally don't serve in the IDF. The official justification is that they have to work on their religious studies, so they're exempt from the draft, and that causes a lot of resentment.
I'm sure.
So, one thing with these rescue organizations is it allowed them to contribute to national security in a meaningful way without serving in the military. But then a lot of Netanyahu's supporters are more akin to like evangelical Christians in America. So they're like more religious Jews, but they're not, they're not from these kind of like exclusive communities and stuff like that. Yeah. But they are more religious and poorer. They have larger families. So another thing is the religious Jews are outbreeding the secular Jews within Israel. So that's another thing that's shifting the balance of power.
Well, what this leads to, as you write in your article, is the fact that the IDF is involved with these rescue efforts, or these rescue organizations. One being that Maddie Goldstein, and I hope I'm not pronouncing that, if it's Mati or Maddie, I'm not
sure. They all spell their names multiple ways in English, so that's another frustrating thing.
Yeah.
So Maddie's good enough.
Maddie. So he's the longtime chief operating officer of the Zaka, right?
In theory, his LinkedIn just says he's been in it since 2008. But since I wrote this, I mentioned briefly that Yehuda Meshi-Zahav had named someone else as that position in 2016. And I saw another reference to that guy still being in the position. So like these people are so incredibly shady, you can't even really find out who holds what major position in their organization.
I see. And so, but at least this individual is a 25-year veteran of the IDF, basically.
Yeah, he's in the reserves still currently because, people do that for a long time. But yeah, he previously did what he describes as like high-level undercover work for them, meaning that he is, in fact, a trained spy of the Israeli government.
Okay. And again, to bring this all back home, is that this organization is the organization that is often involved with the initial reports from the ground of who was killed, how they were killed. And you mentioned in your piece too, is that oftentimes some of the reports, again, this incentive is to create the appearance that things are worse than they actually are, and to say some things are terrorism when in fact it might just be a benign secular like love triangle gone wrong. And that is all to say that don't believe at first word what the word is from the ground, essentially.
Yeah, and it specifically said in one of those articles, they're not authorized to determine what is terrorism or what is not terrorism, even if it obviously seems that way. The police and the military make the determination of if something was a terrorist attack, not the first responders.
Yeah.
Or not these non-government first responders.
But I guess your initial inclination would be that you want to give this eyewitness, right, a lot of credibility and put a lot of weight to what their report is.
Well, that would be the human instinct. As someone that has studied literature and knows a lot about how humans recall things and how nonfiction books works, my initial thing would be to be skeptical. But a normal person who isn't me would give them a lot of credibility for having been there.
Well, and that's what they teach you in law school too. Like especially when I was going through my my post-conviction class, like the wrongful convictions class, they had a whole thing about how eyewitness testimony is like the least credible form of evidence that you have, but it's the one that the jury gives the most weight to when they hear it. Because, you get a person on the stand who, they don't show up in their little yellow jackets there, but, they're crying and obviously they've been through something and seen terrible things. You want to believe them.
Yeah.
So specifically then, maybe we want to dive into some of the investigative work that you've done with like researching this nonprofit and starting with their website, I guess, and Samantha Power and then the financials.
Yeah, so I'll explain this as quick as I can, but a huge red flag for me was that they had Samantha Power, who listeners to a show like this probably know who that is, but she's one of the main U.S. regime change people that especially is in Democrat administrations. I don't even remember what her job is right now, but she's heavily involved in the Biden administration. And so, I saw that, and that was a big red flag for me. Anyway, so I was just looking at this website, and like I said, usually you can find their financial information easily enough, but I couldn't. So I typed in the employer identification number that they listed at the bottom because it's a tax deductible donation. So they have to, publicize this information. And what I found is that it took you to something called Zaka North Inc., which barely appears to exist, if I'm being honest. But in 2016, they brought in, I believe it was $650,000. Every year besides that, they filed a truncated IRS form, what's called a postcard filing, because they took in under $50,000. And so I went into the 1 year that they had. They spent a third of their total money on conferences, only half of which they classify and only like half of which they classified as being fundraising related. So I don't know what else they would be doing. And then they do list a disbursement of $160,000 to the Middle East to an unnamed party, which I would like to mention just as before we go on. If you or I admitted to sending over $100,000 by wire transfer to an unnamed party in the Middle East, the FBI would be at our door the next day. I am sure of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, they did that, and it didn't seem very convincing that it was what it was. So then I just searched for Zaka Search and Rescue Inc. because it's a name they used. And that led me to a different organization that had no connection to the Zaka World website and didn't say how it was bringing in money. And that one seemed much more real in terms of like the officers being people that you could find existed, because the other one was just one guy that I could find nothing but, a dead phone number for and an address. And so this other one, this really prominent Ukrainian Jewish businessman in New York was the president of for 3 years. So he's an identifiable public figure. He actually works in the mayor's office now. And they brought in around $1 million a year. Though once again, they said they didn't transfer any of it to any foreign corporation, but did send huge wire transfers to the Middle East. They had very little information. And then further, their phone number was the same phone number as another organization that raises money for first responders, like Israel's version of EMS services, and raises money for them. And they shared the same employer identification number, but there was no information that would bring all of them together. And then, I looked up this other one because that guy had actually said he was the president of I don't know, it was yet a third name. And I found that was a different one that had been founded by Yehuda Meshi-Zahav himself that was like seemingly defunct now. So there were several of these, and they don't really make it clear what they do. They don't admit to any formal connection to the Zaka organization in Israel. There's no direct evidence in their filings that they've sent any money there to that specific corporation. And bear in mind, there's a spot for who you sent it to that they left blank. So if it was truthful, I'm sure that they, would have just written that in. They're using professional accountants. So it's all very strange. And, I asked someone about this with more knowledge of finances than I have. And he said, for organizations this size, it could just be lazy. It could be sloppy. It could have an innocent explanation you're not thinking of. They could have changed how things work since then. But the problem is that it's been shown in court in Israel that the Meshi-Zahav brothers, because the guy has two other brothers who are also deeply implicated in a lot of things, that they had done this in Israel where they set up essentially fake Zaka organizations and took donations, giving receipts from the main Zaka charity, and then didn't transfer any of the money to the real Zaka charity. And this has been heavily exposed in Israeli media. I'm not making any specific accusations here, but I link to, reports by the Times of Israel and Haaretz and other major newspapers that were obviously vetted by their legal team before they published them, that shows that any normal person would think something is seriously not right here.
And one of the stories was in Israel where the attorney for one of the organizations was solicited for a donation.
Okay, so here's what happened is that they have a long history of not paying their debts. So they were in debt to suppliers, to different types of vendors, to the Israeli government itself. And so there was basically a lien. I don't remember what word they put on it, but they got put in trusteeship by the court. So 28% of all money that came into them was supposed to go to this court-appointed trustee who represented the interests of their creditors, whose job it was to pay them all fairly. And so they were under legal obligation to give this money to this person. And then, he got cold called by someone soliciting donations to a Zaka organization. So he asked them to send all the information, including how to make it tax deductible, and found out that it all went to a completely different bank account while going to the same Zaka. And so it's funny, the article said, because he's a law-abiding citizen, when in reality, because he represents people that were supposed to be getting this money, he went to court and filed a fraud complaint against them. And in court, they acknowledged that they had an alleged informal agreement about some of the money going to the Zaka organization, but that they were under no legal obligation to transfer any of the money to it. And ultimately, the case was dropped due to what they called a lack of public interest, which is crazy to me because I can't imagine what there's more public interest in than a search and rescue organization people rely on after disasters, stealing money from donors instead of spending it on life-saving equipment.
Right. Yeah. And I think, and I got the information. I think I misunderstood from your article. But it was like the receiver, I don't know, when you go into bankruptcy in the US, there's a receivership. And so it was the receiver, the court-appointed trustee who would collect, manage the assets of the bankrupt company or what have you. And
yes, they didn't declare bankruptcy. They were near bankruptcy. And once again, I don't know that much about this kind of law, but yeah.
Yeah.
It was the court-appointed receiver, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I've dabbled in bankruptcy, but I'd forgotten more than I ever knew about it. Welcome to the portion of the show where I tell you how you can help support this content. The best way to do that, guys, is to go to libertyweekly.club. Yes, I haven't changed the URL yet, but this is my membership website that also functions as a newsletter. So if you go to that website, libertyweekly.club, hit the subscribe button in the upper right-hand corner, and you can subscribe for the free newsletter, and I send out a lot of free content. However, there is a section in those free emails that is premium, and that premium section includes early access to my episodes, access to bonus episodes, and preprints of my articles before they're published at the Libertarian Institute or other outlets. So again, go to the website, hit subscribe in the top right-hand corner, and sign up for that email list. You go through the page here and you can see all the content that I've set out in the past. There's a whole bunch of it, guys, and you get access to those previous emails that have gone out as well. Another way to help support me is to go to vitaldescent.com/stitchfix and sign up through my link there. You'll get $25 off your first order, and I will also get a $25 credit. Guys, I use this to buy my wardrobe. I'm a father of 2. I have my own business. I do this, and I don't have time to go shopping. Can't haul the wife and kids around to have a leisurely shop for myself to pick these clothes. So what Stitch Fix does is that they pick the clothes for you. They send them to you in fixes, and it's really awesome stuff. These are all the pieces that I personally have bought myself. There's a lot of work stuff in there, but there's also casual stuff. I got an awesome plaid shirt that's in there, a flannel, really love that. I got this really cool sweatshirt. I got these awesome boots and a nice windbreaker, really good stuff. So go on over to vitaldescent.com/Stitch Fix. You can also get Vital Descent, really hard not to say Liberty Weekly, Vital Descent merchandise with the cool, awesome new logo from Mises Pieces. You can get all these kinds of things, all this merch. You got coffee cups, pint glasses, sweatshirts, premium t-shirts, premium sweatshirts, all that good stuff there at vitaldescent.com/merch. Also, guys, I started a TikTok channel, and I think that'll be really cool, trying to get more eyeballs on this content and more views. You can see it's already garnering a bunch of views, where I do anti-war cartoon reviews and a lot of cool stuff there. So vitaldescent.com/TikTok is where you can find me. My handle is at @PatMcFarland_, the same as my Twitter handle. Okay, guys, that's about it. Check out those things. Please help support this content. Help me pay my producer and make the show better for you guys. Thanks. Yeah, and so you have a piece, you have an earlier article that you linked in this one that we're discussing, where you talk about how you go through and investigate nonprofits. And I'll try and put a link to that in the show notes, because I think for the work that we do and the topics that I cover on this show, that process is like invaluable, because more often than not, you are dealing with, that's how the regime change happens. The influence happens behind the scenes.
Yeah, so it was actually a thread, and I didn't have to go, like a Twitter thread, and I didn't actually have to go into the filings like I did in this. It was more the more public level of it. But yeah, I mean, it explained it's usually pretty easy for NGOs, think tanks, stuff like that. They're usually proud of the fact that they work with Citibank, that they're supported by the State Department of every country in Western Europe. Yeah. So usually it's really right on the surface. The most funny one of all of these, there's something called Open Caucasus Media, for like the Caucasus area, which I can never pronounce. But anyway, they say on their website, people accuse us of being funded by the United States or George Soros, but we're completely independent. And you go to their very own funding website, and they get over 2/3 of their money from the National Endowment for Democracy and Open Societies Foundation. Yeah. And they directly say that. It's just so brazen. It's incredible.
Well, for one thing, I don't know if you've done any work on like Falun Gong and the Uyghurs and stuff like that, but someone had said that basically that Falun Gong is funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. And I went through, and someone actually wrote a paper where they did exactly what you did, and found that it's all funneled through this organization called the Friends of Falun Gong, where the NED money goes to one guy. And the specifics of it, I would refer, and maybe I'll link to this actual paper that I'm talking about. But it's like several different channels removed, like a former NED a member gives a grant to this Friends of Falun Gong, and then the Friends of Falun Gong funds all of these Uyghur organizations. And so it's things like that, they don't talk about it.
Yeah, and it's usually not actually that difficult if you know what you're doing.
Yeah. The
Zaka one was actually really hard because they're extremely sketchy. Like, most of these are not doing anything at all illegal. It's all on a legal sense. It's completely above board. It's just clear who they're being funded by,
right. Yeah. So then all of that is the financial, kind of the shady financial side of it. But then you get into the real kind of scandal. And you described this Yehuda Meshi-Zahav as being kind of like the Israeli Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, one of the community members in the Haredi community referred to him as the Haredi Jeffrey Epstein.
Sorry, that wasn't you.
That was a quote from one of them, yeah.
So even more still, it's a quote from someone who actually has personal knowledge.
Yes, and he said that his entire life, everyone in the community has known what was going on, and he was at the very least an adult.
Yeah, and so going back again, I guess then to the beginning of this Yehuda, and is it in is Yehuda's the family name, and so it's not.
No, Meshi-Zahav is the family name. His brothers' names are Moshe and Remy.
Oh, okay. So it's not like the Chinese or at least the Taiwanese have the family name first and then.
No,
second.
Apparently that name means silk gold in Hebrew, which I found out from using a translated Google that only translated it as the name some of the times.
Okay. So he begins his life as being this like kind of famous, well-known anti-Zionist, and then all of a sudden he has this twist, complete 180 in his beliefs, and I guess we can speculate perhaps that he was compromised in some way, and he becomes involved with this organization who's at least frontwardly very Zionist, has this change of heart. And I guess we can speculate that it was because all of his scandals were being blackmailed or covered up.
It seems highly plausible. At the same time, seeing the blood of your countrymen who died in a violent attack, like getting it on your hands, has a strong effect on a lot of people. So, it might be some of both. But the Haaretz article that came out in 2021, so what happened is he won is what's called the Israel Prize. It's Israel's highest civic honor. It was awarded to him by Yoav Gallant, who's currently the defense minister, but was the education minister at the time. And within about a week of that, Haaretz came out with this extraordinary article where they detailed sexual abuse allegations from 7 different people that they were able to speak to, dating back as far as 1982. And it was everything. It was really sick, horrific things. There was a pattern of him preying on the poor. A lot of ultra Orthodox families have many children, in some cases like 10 or 14 were some of the examples in it. They don't have a lot of money, so the kids don't get a lot of attention. And they have the same problem as a lot of insular religious communities where, they don't talk about sex. They don't get sex education to know what abuse is. They don't have words to explain what is happening to them. And so, he was plying them with, buying them, for example, one of them, he bought a pager in the 80s when that was, really the thing to have, or, he's giving them rides. He's helping them with any number of things, buying them meals, letting them, do this or that. And then, abusing them in various ways. And it ranged the gamut. It was, both adults and children, boys and girls, men and women, all sorts of weird stuff involving third parties as well. Like some of the stories of abuse included that. Some of them it went on for years. Some of them it was just attempted rape in I guess you'd say the normal kind, if you will. That was like the main first one that they got. The woman that he said to her, if you say anything to anyone, a Zaka van will run you over. And so, this crazy expose came out, and, he gave back his Israel Prize like the next day that he had held for, only like 8 days, and then finally resigned from Zaka. But, there had been previous investigations like in 2013 in which his brother did go to jail for sexually abusing his own daughter when she was a teenager and pre-teenager. And his other brother, who had also been arrested for this in 2003, fled the country and stayed out of Israel for 8 years. So it all came out like that. And then once that was going on, more people came to the police because most of them were past the statute of limitations. So just about a week later, the police issued formal charges against him. And it was just a flood of various accusations, most of which are very detailed. And honestly, I'm going to just say very weird and not things that any normal person would think of if they were making up an abuse allegation.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so wild that, you just kind of see this kind of situation over and over again. It's kind of, disturbing.
Yes, it's definitely disturbing.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember that. Have you ever read Programmed to Kill?
I have not.
Oh, okay. Well, at any rate, maybe I'll pull that up in a minute here and just kind of talk about it a little bit. But it just kind of traces that throughout, all of these societies have their own high level sex scandals like this. And I guess it wasn't per se one of those like far off, like crazy wild conspiracy books. It was all talking about things that are very well documented in like the newspapers of record in all of these developed countries.
Yeah, or I mean, even like the 12 Caesars by Suetonius, or any number of things that you can find this all going back very, very far.
And I think that I haven't finished Program to Kill. It's by David McGowan, and he's not like a crazy Alex Jones type. I think he was kind of like a leftist. But you can.
Well, there's a really, really insane one in Belgium, I think, in like 2002, that is just shocking beyond belief. That I'm sure is in that book.
It is. You're exactly right. Yeah. So, but I think that where McGowan kind of goes with it is that all of these serial killers have things in common, and he speculates as to like them being programmed to kill by the CIA or something. But at least at the very beginning, it's very grounded in like reporting on, like the what's the one that happened in Nebraska? Like the
in cold blood murders? Or no, that was in Kansas.
No, I'm thinking about Jesus Christ. Conspiracy of Silence. That one. Well, at any rate, I covered it like, with Johnny Gosch being involved. I had Hunter Durensis on to talk about this. I just can't think of the name of the Franklin cover-up, that one.
Okay.
But yeah, at any rate, so where does the story kind of goes from there to, some of the founding, like the main guy being involved in all the sexual controversies. And then where does it turn from there?
Okay, so firstly, there was one last thing to come out about them, that it was difficult to know how to order this because they had been doing all these different things over so many years, and I kind of had to do it by theme.
Yeah.
But so it also came out that they've been lying about their volunteer numbers for years to bilk a bunch of like millions of shekels out of the Israeli government, because there are requirements about their volunteers and, how they're supposed to be trained and stuff like this. So that also came out that, the organization has about 1/4 the amount of volunteers that they say they do. And, they're still giving those numbers. They deny that any of that's true. It was another very good Haaretz report. They had both documents and 10 anonymous sources, which is as good as you do on investigative journalism ever, really, And the Israeli government wouldn't give them the names of the volunteers from a Freedom of Information Request Act because they said it would compromise their security. But, they only needed to see that the list, basically see the number of names on the list. They didn't even really need to know the names as such. So, yeah, they had all of that scandal come out, which they also completely deny. So, I mean, that's just another reason that their leadership remains non-credible. But as far as Yehuda Meshi-Zahav, about a month and a half after this came out, he was found hanging in his apartment in a West Bank settlement, which I don't remember the name of right now. And he was found by his son, and he was rushed to the hospital where they were able to resuscitate him, but he remained in a coma. And then 2 separate suicide notes were released, one where he said he was sorry and took the blame for what had happened, and one where he said that he had done none of the things in question. The family said the second one was real and the first one was a forgery. No one ever got to the bottom of this aspect of it, as far as I saw, because obviously one of those is fake. Like, it's possible both of them are fake, but it's not the case that both of them are real. And so, yeah, he went into a coma and died just over a year later. And I mean, that is the end of his story. He's buried in the Mount of Olives Cemetery in the section for suicides. And yeah, so I mean, that's the end of him. But everyone in the leadership in Zaka clearly at least knew about the accusations for a long time. They knew about the alleged financial improprieties, and they're all the same people that worked with him. And, the police were expanding the investigation into if Zaka was involved in covering this up when he tried to kill himself. And it seems like everyone was happy to be done with the situation and not have to dig farther into it. And yeah, I mean, that was the end of him. And now they're trying to claim like the rest of Zaka has nothing to do with it. But they're all deeply implicated in all of this by their continued association with him over a period of 30 years.
Yeah, it's just wild stuff. And so you said that this was probably the longest piece that you've written?
This is the longest thing I've ever written in my life. Yeah.
And you worked on it over the course of a couple weeks, right? Or was it longer?
6 days.
Oh, so even shorter than that.
Yeah, it's 12,500 words, which I determined if it's like in college, how they be double spaced. It's like a 50-page college paper, basically.
Yeah. Well, and so I was thinking too, because this 40 beheaded babies claim came from this network that's very pro Netanyahu, right? It's like, is it I-24 or what is it called?
Yeah, it's I-24.
Okay. And Max Blumenthal, when that 40 beheaded babies story came out, he did his own report on this man, David Ben
I saw
Zion.
that.
So I didn't know where, because you had said there were some claims that were commented on by Zaka, but he at least, I think, is saying that this guy is the original source of the claim itself.
Yeah, so Zaka didn't actually have anything to do with the 40 beheaded babies. I just used that to illustrate the example of what was going on.
Okay, my apologies, because I think it's been a long day, and I read your article before we recorded, and I feel like I'm getting all these little twists of facts wrong.
It's a very complex story.
It is, yeah. It's hard to learn, but it's so important, and I think that part of the complication of it is, it seems, I don't want to say it's a feature and not a bug, but it's just a testament to how easily these propaganda stories will spread, and the finer details of them are worked through later when no one's listening.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I'm running around my head. I'm trying to actually write an article about this for the Libertarian Institute currently. I just am slow on it. But yeah, it's gone to the point where these things move so quickly that it's really hard to know what's real and what's not. And, like, for example, we had the hospital bombing, and everyone thought like 500 people had died. Israel had a story for how it was Hamas's fault. And then it turned out, a bomb exploded in the parking lot. There was a large explosion. Some number of people died, but it's, not the same amount. And then, we had this church bombing. We're like, oh, the church is still standing. But, it turns out they did bomb the area where everyone was sheltering, just not the historic sanctuary. Justin Amash lost a lot of family members, as you probably saw.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, it is a real thing that happened, and a lot of people died. And then it's the same thing as the babies. No one ever claimed that there were 40 beheaded babies. They claimed there were 40 dead, some of them beheaded, but it was reported on so incredibly irresponsibly that no matter what, people were going to get bogged down in the details, and they were going to end up being wrong. And this just keeps happening over and over again. And so, I've been thinking, like, what's a person supposed to do about this? And the fact is, like, we know for a fact that Hamas intentionally massacred civilians. Like, that definitely happened. And we know that Israel's airstrikes are killing a lot of civilians. You don't need any reporting from the Hamas Health Ministry. Look at the pictures of what has happened to Gaza.
Right.
You do not do that without a large civilian casualty. So really, all of the rest of this are just details that are designed to get an emotional reaction from you, to stop you from thinking rationally, to make you think that it's okay to publish civilians for what military groups did. And I don't remember who it was, but I saw an article that was talking about how, these like rules of war and stuff about like not harming civilians, like that's like a contract with humanity, not with the other party that you're in warfare with, So like the point, it has nothing to do with what Hamas would do. What Hamas would do, or Hamas being a terrorist organization, has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not it's okay to kill civilians with airstrikes. Those are unrelated, absolutely. And so, the only thing you can really do is look at the bigger picture and then actually have a strong foundation of what you believe in. And what I know is that both sides, the people that are in power in both sides, want violence because they think that it benefits them, but that 75 years of history has showed us that this cycle of violence is not leading to anywhere but more violence. It's not making Israel safe. It's not creating a sustainable Palestinian state. It's not improving the lives for anyone on either side. They're not going to ultimately defeat each other. So the only thing to do is to chart a different course and hope that it brings about different results. So in the end, it doesn't actually, it obviously matters to the people that died and their family members and loved ones, but the hospital bombing or the specific details of the worst atrocities, if people were tied together when they were burned, or any of these other things like that, if the babies were found beheaded or with their heads on, none of this really matters in the big picture compared to the fact that these are humans that are dying, and that this cycle of violence is just continuing, and they're trying to make you angry, so you want it to continue because you want revenge instead of thinking clearly. So step back and think about what will actually make this stop instead of getting focused on the grisly details.
Yeah, and I think that's a good message to come across. And I took a little bit of a different approach in terms of like, so I put out that article at the Institute called.
Yeah, I read that.
What did you think of that? And don't feel like you have to agree with me.
Oh, no, I mean, I thought it was good. I thought you made some very strong points. And yeah, I mean, I read a lot of things every day, so my recall on it is not perfect. But like, I mean, you made a point that, for example, like we don't honestly know for a fact that they targeted the music festival. We do know a lot of people died there. Zaka is the main source of the claim that 260 people died at that music festival.
Yeah, so that was the one where it came in. Yeah.
Yeah, and we do know plenty of people died. And I talked about this at the end, is like, does it make a difference if it was 260 or 250 or 150? You know, people clearly think it does. That's why they're hitting these stories so hard. But we don't know that they did that intentionally. We, should not really believe them about this guidebook having been dropped, though, there's like a GoPro video from Hamas, like one of them having a map or something, which, I mean, makes sense. They were told about the operation that morning. They wouldn't have memorized anything. Yeah. But, it's like all of this stuff, once again, we don't know. We know people died at the music festival, but it was so close to Gaza, it could have just been in their way. It could have been the nearest thing they thought of at the last minute. There are a lot of people claiming that a big part of the issue was they got into a firefight with the IDF there with all those civilians around, which is entirely possible. It's one of these things where the IDF is going to want to deny it, but like if it's true, there wasn't a lot else they could do, and it's still Hamas that attacked there, where there were a bunch of civilians. So, I mean, it's just difficult to know the truth, but you can be sure that getting enraged by this violence happening is not going to make you make any clearer or better decisions.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of my major kind of thoughts about it was that, well, if we spend all this time debating the specifics over how the atrocities were carried out, or if they're credible reports or not, I guess from someone who cares personally and thinking that, well, I'm someone who, I mean, I do support, I'm more sympathetic to the Palestinian plight, maybe not Hamas specifically, but I mean, it's clear that there's an imbalance in the amount of gore and violence that's being, taken out. So does spending all this time focusing on debating, the validity of of Israeli atrocity claims, does that detract from the death that is clearly being inflicted, at a different rate?
Well, what's really important to remember is that you've been conditioned your entire life to think that airstrikes are somehow more humane than other forms of mass murder. Right. And that's not true at all. Like, I mean, I just got into this with some, I don't know, idiot that used to be an editor at the Daily Beast or something that stopped responding when I pointed this out. But they're saying like, no, I do think airstrike, being killed instantly in an airstrike is better than, what happened to these people. It's like, you're not necessarily killed instantly by an airstrike. You could be trapped under rubble for 24 hours. You could die in a hospital covered with burns. You could, any number of things. I think you're proving my point. You've been conditioned to think airstrikes are something different than they are. Yeah. And I really wish I would have hounded on this point about the civil war in Sudan, because we don't have time to get into it, but the Sudanese armed forces have been airstriking civilian areas, but the rapid support forces don't have an air force, so they've been going around in the back of heliuxes and they've been, massacring civilians. And so all of the civilized types at the think tanks and, the big newspapers and everything have grown to think that the Sudanese armed forces are better because they believe that it's more civilized to kill people with airstrikes than to kill them with guns. But the fact is, when you are at war, you kill people with the weapons that you have. And in fact, there's a strong argument to be made that it is morally better to kill someone up close with your hands than to sit behind a computer screen at some mini mall in Nevada and kill someone with a drone where you're not risking your safety at all and you don't have to deal with up close with the moral weight of killing another human being.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I've done a fair amount of work on like killing in war and the morality of it, and it seems like one of the way that people justify killing another human being is if it's made an equal playing field. Like one of the reasons why people really put dogfighting on a pedestal, especially in the First World War, is that they saw it as being honorable. Yeah. Because it was two honorable duels between two men who had consented to be there, and in some way it's like the purest form of killing.
Yeah.
strange.
But yeah,
It makes sense.
Just everyone really, I noticed this is part of what turned me into the person that I am, but I noticed this in 5th grade when they were bombing Kosovo, that everyone was treating this like it was normal to be just like bombing this random place I had never heard of. Well, when they were bombing Serbia over Kosovo, I should say.
Yeah.
But that everyone was acting like this was normal. And, I thought, what is wrong with this society? And then 9/11 happened and everyone was like, what did we ever do to anyone? Why would anyone do this to us? And I was like, am I the only person that remembers like 3 years ago when we were bombing that country relentlessly for no obvious reason and everyone acted like it was normal?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've also remarked upon and thought about how it seems like now, even more so than what happened during, when Russia invaded Ukraine, it seems like people are not just buying the narrative as much as they did then. And I don't know if that's because there's a substantial portion of the left that has always been pro-Palestinian. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or?
Well, everyone had really strong opinions about Israel-Palestine going back really far, though, they had spent a solid 6 years of constant anti-Russia propaganda, very directly targeted at the Democrats. So, there was really strong hatred towards Russia and at least decent support of Ukraine when that started. But all of I don't know, it's just such the biggest sacred cow in American politics. People, they have this fallacious notion that because we've been supporting Israel for 75 years, it's crucial to our security, that they're such a great ally. The reality is we are a net oil exporter. We don't need the Middle East for anything. Our support of Israel is the main thing that makes us a target of terrorism. It doesn't protect us from anything. It makes us less safe. We've given them $250 billion over 75 years, and they didn't bother to guard their own border because they sent all of their troops to the West Bank to deal with the unrest they caused by expanding their settlements. It's I don't know, it's absolutely crazy. But yeah, people are just set on this idea that it provides us some sort of unique service. It's a lot of the people talking about this are not jobs, but it really is a very colonialist mindset. It's our, piece of civilization that is set down in the barbaric Middle East. It just satisfies all of these different emotional needs people have to support this or that. It's a whole thing, I guess.
Well, what do you think is the most charitable case for what does Israel do for us? Is it a strategic ally that we can count on for any actual?
For society at large, like humanity at large, Israel does a lot of biomedical research, a lot of technological research. So, they do contribute to humanity as a whole quite a lot in the things that they produce and that they study and, stuff like that. But from a direct military standpoint, it's a massive liability that just makes people hate us that have no other good reason they now have plenty of other good reasons to hate us, but we can't get into the whole history of the war on terror here.
Sure.
But
yeah,
I know people are they're just stuck in the mindset like, oh, it's our key ally in the Middle East and all this other stuff. And it's like, they're too busy guarding themselves to send troops anywhere. Like, what do you expect them to do in the event of a major war? We're going to end up defending them. It's our whole country is just taken over by these zombie policies. Like I was talking about the systems that, we inherited failing. It's just another one of countless zombie policies that people think is good because they've been taught their whole lives it was good. And so they're just going to keep doing it until in one way or another it catastrophically fails. And then when that happens, they're not going to reflect on anything or do anything different next time.
Yeah. And it's kind of like the thing with NATO. It's like, okay, well, if the United States is attacked, I don't know, by someone on, if Canada attacks the United States, but do we think that like Estonia is going to be sending troops over to help in any meaningful way?
Well, no, what's really funny about that is that they showed Finland like building a new border wall because it joined NATO. And doesn't that demonstrate that it made them less safe? They didn't need a border wall with Russia when they weren't in NATO. And now that they're in NATO, they need one. I've written about Estonia extensively, actually, the Baltics in general.
Yeah.
And they, Kaya Kallas, the prime minister, who's an absolute idiot, acknowledged in 2022 that she had been told by NATO that their plan, if they were attacked, was to just let Russia take those countries and then like later set an invasion force and liberate them later. So it's like the dumbest thing you can do as a small power like that is let your country be used as a battleground between superpowers, which is all they're getting from NATO. Those countries are brought into NATO as liabilities, as tripwires. They're not, they don't defend anything. They don't help our readiness. Their sole purpose in NATO is to cause problems that can lead to conflict and nothing else. Other than that, a lot of people seem to genuinely believe that expanding NATO indefinitely somehow helps, even if they're these ramshackle little countries that provide nothing. Meanwhile, Turkey is one of the only countries in NATO that's actually militarily useful in a major conflict, and they're such dicks to them all the time that it's not even clear that they would be on our side if a major conflict broke out.
Right. And didn't we just admit Greece too? And Greece has major problems with Turkey. Or am I off
Greece
on
has
that?
been in a long time. It's their problems within that has been an ongoing thing forever.
Yeah.
Greece has been in NATO for a long time, but they dispute all sorts of stuff with each other. Who gets access to our aircraft programs, this or that? What would happen if they went to war when they're both in NATO? It's a whole ridiculous thing.
Am I thinking of Macedonia? That was
so there's
admitted.
been a big thing about trying to expand in that area. So I've also written about the Balkans extensively. So Serbia has been getting increasingly encircled by those countries. Montenegro was brought into NATO, or is in the process. I don't actually, I guess, remember right now which of all of them are in, but so that's been an issue. So they've expanded it there because they're encircling Serbia in a variety of ways. And, Greece and Macedonia buried the hatchet because it was the big name thing they were fighting about forever. It's North Macedonia now. It's a million. They're falling into 100 errors instead of admitting to one, which is something men are prone to do. And it's a zombie policy like all the others.
Well, the way that you get right wingers to care about Serbia is to there's an ammunition manufacturing plant there called Privy Partisan, and they just recently stopped importing to the United States because they want to save their ammunition for a possible conflict.
I read about that.
They were the only, so from like a right-wing gun nuts perspective, they were one of the only companies that were making affordable military surplus ammo that shoots in old guns, like the Swiss K31 or like the British 303 British or 8mm or 7mm Mauser. So a lot of people are, people you talk to at the gun store are upset about that, who are into this shit. And so just say, we won't have that ammo anymore if we get involved in a major war, or we encourage a war between Serbia and Kosovo again.
Well, you want to know something that's really funny is people like Serbia because they see it as being really like socially conservative and having traditional family values. But Serbia's prime minister is a lesbian, and it's widely believed in Serbia that she was placed in that position by the president for the purpose of just like the woke capital nonsense of, like Raytheon sponsoring a pride parade or whatever. Like he just felt like it would make all of the idiot Western countries think Serbia was like softer and like nicer to gay people. Well,
the other thing too, I guess, God damn it, the AK plant there, the Serbian AK plant, they're not importing AKs anymore. So that sucks because they were really good. And I can't believe I can't Zastava. So anyways, but at any rate, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think I should have you back on again because you do write for the Institute. It's a great excuse to have you back on. So what?
And I cover a lot of different topics too. So.
Yeah. And so what are you said you're working on? What's your next piece that you're coming out with?
Well, for my main piece or my Substack, I don't actually know right now. I've been, it's difficult. I don't want to write another thing about Israel, but it's the only thing anyone has been talking about. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what I come up with in that regard. But my idea for a piece of the Institute is definitely about how to deal with the extreme amounts of misinformation that even someone with like as critical of an eye as I have cannot really tell what's true or false in these situations. Like a normal person has not really any chance. It's
a dead kid fight. I linked to that meme in my piece that But so your Substack is called The Wayward Rabbler, and people can go to thewaywardrabbler.com to sign up for that. Is there anywhere else that you would send folks?
I mean, just my Twitter account, which is @WaywardRabbler, is the main other place that you would find me. And then, I'm currently kind of trying to transition to doing this full time.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna be working on trying to form relationships with new publications. I just have not really successfully done so yet. So yeah, we'll see where my work ends up, I guess.
Well, do you charge a premium subscription fee? Because you should advertise that.
Oh yeah, well I mean, I have paid memberships. It's $6 a month or $60 a year. All of my main articles are free and don't have a paywall on them. But my wife and I do a podcast called Dispatches from Clown World, where we discuss the most ridiculous events going on in our society. And that's generally free for the first 48 hours or so. And then I put it behind a paywall. We just switched to that format. But anyway, the main thing you get for buying the premium membership, besides helping me so I can continue to write articles like this, is that you do get access to the full archive of all of the podcasts that we've done.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Okay. All right. So once again, thewaywardrabbler.com. And Brad, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for writing this piece.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, this piece I think it's really important. So thanks for writing it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.